group of islands which lie almost north and south along 145 degrees east longitude and between 13 and 20 degrees north latitude. The north-south length of the group is about 420 miles. Second largest and most populous of the Marianas is Saipan Island, approximately 12.5 miles long, 5 miles wide in the central portion, with a total area of about 72 square miles. In this area, the year can be divided into two seasons: the dry season from December to June, and the wet season from July to November. Between May and October, easterly winds predominate, but with considerable percentages from southerly and westerly directions. Velocity from 10 to 11 knots. Summer is the wet season with an average of from 17 to 23 rainy days per month. In general, the east coast of Saipan was free of barrier or fringing reefs. The south coast has a narrow fringing reef and a steep gradient. The west coast was almost entirely protected by fringing and barrier type reefs, breached once at Charan Kanoa and in 4 places at Garapan. The only good anchorage was located off Charan Kanoa, outside the reef, during easterly winds. With a few unimportant exceptions, landing beaches along the eastern coast were non-existent. Along the south coast, there were abrupt banks and undercut cliffs, with a maximum elevation of 50 feet. With the exception of a few minor sections, the entire western coast has a fairly wide sandy beach. From the base of Aguinian Point to the reef opening near Charan Kanoa, the beach extended 2,750 yards in length and was 7 to 15 yards wide. Wharves: a wharf and 3 piers at Tanapag Harbor. This is the only harbor in which there was a partial protection from all winds. The entrance channel was about 1,800 yards long, 235 feet wide, with a minimum depth of 22.5 feet. The government pier at Garapan, and 900 yards north, there was a boat construction and repair yard. There also was a pier at Charan Kanoa. Along the center of Saipan, running generally north and south, was a mountainous ridge. Principal peaks were Mount Tapacho, 1,554 feet. Mount Marpi, 853 feet. Mount Cagman, 479 feet. Mount Naputan, 407 feet. On the eastern side of Marpi Point were a number of limestone caves. At Mount Marpi, there was a single sheer cliff almost 600 feet high. The northern portion of the ridge was broken by a series of 2 to 4 terraces, separated by rocky cliffs. Charan Kanoa Marsh, also called Lake Susupi, included a freshwater lake. Half a mile southwest of the lake was a swamp covering 25 acres. 3 sugarcane plantations were situated on Saipan. Number 1 occupied most of the southern portion. Number 2 formed the east central peninsula. And number 3 occupied all of the flat land around the northern end, a distance of about 12 miles. About 70% of Saipan was under sugar cultivation. In the vicinity of Charan Kanoa, some of the area was devoted to vegetable farming. Garapan town, main settlement, was second in size in the Marianes, being exceeded in population and importance only by Aganya in Guam. Population about 10,000, 3/4 of whom were Japanese. Charan Kanoa covered an area of about 1 square mile. There were a number of other small settlements. Good roads encircled the island, and also crossed the island at Carabera Pass, from Flores Point to the eastern coast, and east from Charan Kanoa. A good network of roads extended throughout the southern part of the island. Practically all roads could be shelled from the sea. A fairly well-developed system of secondary roads and trails existed in most sections of the island. A railroad with several spur lines almost encircled the island. there were approximately 20,000 Japanese civilians. The natives consisted of about 4,000 Kanakas and Okinawans. The population was mainly engaged in sugarcane production.
In general, there was little food produced in excess of the needs of the civilian population. There was little fresh water. Most of the drinking water was obtained by storage of rainwater.
Sanitation at Saipan was generally fair. However, there were no sewage systems. Toilet systems were primitive. Mosquitoes were abundant in all parts of the island, however, not the Anopheles type.
Prevailing diseases were dysentery, eye troubles, yaws, dengue fever, tuberculosis, typhoid and paratyphoid, as well as occasional cases of venereal diseases and a few isolated cases of leprosy.
Principal airfield in Saipan was the Aslito Strip. At Charankanoa, there was a runway strip, which actually was little more than the widening of a road at that point. The third airfield was on the northern coast near Mapi Point. A major seaplane base with 5 hangars and 2 large ramps was at Flores Point. From studies of recent reconnaissance photographs, it was apparent that the garrison forces in the Marianas had been considerably reinforced since the latter part of February, and it was estimated that by the Saipan target date, the garrisons would consist of a total of about 30,000 men, including 7,000 construction personnel. The Japanese were capable of establishing a strong defense at all probable landing beaches, but withholding a strong mobile reserve. It appeared from a study of recent aerial reconnaissance the Japanese had installed strong defensive installations in the whole of Naputan Point, the Aslito airfield area, the vicinity of the Charankanoa airstrip, the area at the southern end of Garapan Town, the area at the northeast end of Garapan Town, the area to the southeast of Marpi Point, vicinity of the new airstrip, the area north of Flores Point, and would use a large mobile reserve to meet the attacks as they would develop. Landmines were to be expected on all probable landing beaches as well as on exits from beaches.
While major units of the Japanese fleet were capable of opposing the operation, it was believed that these units would not interfere except for hit-and-run raids on detached units of American forces. The Japanese were capable of launching more powerful air and submarine attacks than had been heretofore launched in any previous Central Pacific operation. An operation plan was issued 26 April 1944.
The mission. Expeditionary Troops, Task Force 56, with Joint Expeditionary Force Task Force 51, beginning on Dog Day, will seize, occupy, and defend Saipan, Guam, and Tinian Islands in order to obtain their use and deny them to the enemy. Then will prepare for further amphibious operations as directed. That portion of Task Force 56 concerned with the attack on Saipan and under the command of Lieutenant General H.M. Smith was composed of Northern Troops and Landing Force. The organization: Corps Troops of the 5th Fib Corps, 4th Marine Division, 2nd Marine Division, 24th Corps Artillery, 10th Marines reinforced, 14th Marines reinforced and other field artillery units, anti-aircraft artillery. There were other attached units such as signal battalions, medical battalions, engineers, air warning companies, amphibious reconnaissance battalions, amphibian tank and tractor battalions, and garrison forces. In support, 27th Infantry Division, part of the Southern Landing Force. In addition, the 77th Infantry Division was to be alerted at Oahu and prepared to land in support as directed.
Task assignments for the Northern Troops and Landing Force called for: the 1st Battalion, 2nd Marines reinforced, to land during the night of Dog-1 day on beaches at Magician Bay and move inland to seize Mount Tapacho and defend it until relieved. This landing was canceled prior to embarkation, and the 1st Battalion was placed in Corps Reserve. It reverted to division control on D-Day.
The 4th Marine Division reinforced at Howe Hour on Dog Day to land on beaches blue and yellow, seize objective 01 in assigned zone of action, then on division order, advance rapidly and seize Aslito Airfield and that part of Saipan Island in its assigned zone of action. Be prepared for further operations on order. The 2nd Marine Division reinforced at Howe Hour on Dog Day to land on beaches red and green, seize objective 01 in assigned zone of action. Then on division order, advance rapidly and seize Mount Tapacho and Mount Tipopali and that part of Saipan Island in its assigned zone of action. Protect the left, north flank of the Northern Landing Force and be prepared for further operations on order.
The 10th Artillery Regiment of the 2nd Marine Division, with the 2nd 155 Howitzer Battalion attached, to land on Saipan on order of the Commanding General, 2nd Marine Division, and be in direct support of the assault echelon in the division zone of action. The 14th Artillery Regiment of the 4th Marine Division, with the 4th 105 Howitzer Battalion attached, to land on Saipan on order of the Commanding General, 4th Marine Division, and be in direct support of the assault echelon in the division zone of action.
The 24th Corps Artillery to be prepared to land on Saipan Island on Dog Day, or any time thereafter, on order of the Commanding General, Northern Troops and Landing Force. It was to be in general support for the purpose of reinforcing the fires of the 10th Marines and 14th Marines. It was further to be prepared on order for further operations against Tinian Island. Field Artillery. The 27th Infantry Division Artillery in floating reserve under Expeditionary Troops control to be prepared to pass to control of Commanding General, Northern Troops and Landing Force on order, and to land on designated beaches of Saipan and to support the Northern Troops and Landing Force. The anti-aircraft artillery to land on order on beaches to be designated, furnish anti-aircraft protection in the zones of action of the 2nd and 4th Marine Divisions, and revert to control of Saipan Garrison Force on order. The Saipan Garrison Force to land on order on beaches to be designated, establish initial anti-aircraft defenses, initiate airfield repairs, and execute assigned base development missions. The 27th Infantry Division to be prepared to land on order on designated beaches on Saipan in the Charan-Kanoa area, in Tanapag Harbor area, on the west coast north of Tanapag Harbor, or in Magasiani Bay in support of the Northern Landing Force. The order further directed that a naval force, including transport divisions, carrying reserve regiments of Northern Troops and Landing Force, were to conduct a demonstration in the area northwest of Tanapag Harbor on Saipan from 1/2 hour before sunrise on Dog Day to about Howe plus 1 hour on Dog Day. Naval Gunfire Support Mission. Beginning early in the morning on Dog -2 days, fast battleships and destroyers of Task Force 58 were to destroy aircraft, render airfields temporarily useless, destroy coast defenses, anti-aircraft batteries and artillery guns on both Saipan and Tinian, and on Saipan, burn all unburned cane fields lying south of Mucho Point, Bluff Point, destroy enemy defenses and personnel, and cover minesweeping of the shelf to the westward of Saipan. On Dog -1 day, by Bombardment Group 1, counter-battery fire, area bombardment, and interdiction fire on Saipan, and counter-battery fire and target of opportunity fire on Tinian. This was to begin at daybreak for both islands and continue throughout the day on Saipan, with a mission to destroy as many coast defense guns, anti-aircraft batteries, artillery weapons, enemy defenses, and personnel as possible. Particular attention was to be paid to the destruction of gun positions in Magasiani Bay and the beach defenses and installations on the selected landing beaches. Close supporting fire was to be provided to cover the beach reconnaissance by the underwater demolition teams. On Tinian, Fire Bombardment Group 2 was to continue throughout Dog -1 day and Dog Day with a mission to destroy and neutralize enemy guns and defenses, which could interfere with the landing on Saipan. On Dog Day against Saipan by Bombardment Groups 1 and 2, counter-battery fire commencing near dawn and intense destructive fire on beach defenses and installations by ships, then to the flanks and inland to O1 line until lifted by order. Main batteries to lift fire when the LVTs were 1,200 yards from the beaches, and secondary batteries when the LVTs were 300 yards from the beaches. In addition, close supporting fire in the Tanapag Harbor area to cover the demonstration. The close fire support plan for naval gunfire called for the following. Howe -60 until about Howe -30, Fire Support Unit 8 was to deliver heavy caliber enfilade fire on areas in the vicinity of beaches red, green, blue, and yellow. Fire Support Units 1, 2, and 3 were to deliver counter-battery fire during this period. After LCIGs in blue and yellow boat lanes passed the line of fire support ships, fire was to be modified on scheduled targets. This was to ensure safety to LCIGs and boatways. From Howe Hour to Howe Hour +30, 1 heavy cruiser and 2 destroyers were to leave assigned stations, clear boat lane area, and take positions to deliver scheduled fires. 1 light cruiser was to remain in position and prepare to fire on a Fetna point on order. Other ships were to fire as per schedule. The gunboat support group made up of LCIGs were to form and proceed from the line of departure in advance of landing waves. Upon reaching line of fire support ships, this support group was to open fire on beach areas with all 40mm guns. LCIGs in red and green boat lanes were to remain at line of close fire support ships and continue firing 40mm guns as long as safety to landing craft permitted. It emphatically was stressed that rockets were not to be fired by the LCIGs in these lanes. LCIGs of blue and yellow boat lanes were to fire ranging rockets when 1,200 yards from shore, and were to fire rocket salvos when effective range was reached. They were to remain approximately 1,000 yards offshore and continue rocket and 40mm fire on beaches as long as safety to landing craft permitted. After the last assault wave passed the line of LCIGs, the boat lane area was to be cleared and fire continued along the southern flank of Beach Yellow. Aircraft of Task Forces 58, 53, and 52 were to provide support for the capture of Saipan. On Dog -2 day, fighter sweeps on airfields of Saipan and Tinian for the purpose of destroying enemy aircraft. There also was to be protection for minesweepers and other missions as ordered. The maintenance of smokers for the purpose of laying smoke between minesweepers and enemy guns. And finally, combat air patrol as well as anti-submarine patrol. The missions for Dog -1 were as follows. The destruction of inland, coast defense, and dual-purpose guns on Saipan and Tinian. The destruction of anti-aircraft guns on Saipan and Tinian. The firing of sugarcane fields not already burned in this area. The destruction of buildings around Aslito Airport. And the destruction of communications and transportation facilities on the west coast of Saipan. In addition, there were to be continued fighter sweeps on Saipan and Tinian, combat air and anti-submarine patrols, a daytime coverage for maintenance of coordination of air activities, call strikes, coverage for demolition units operating off the western beaches of Saipan, and a photographic plane for the purpose of taking vertical photographs. On Dog Day, the following air support was to be furnished. Combat air and anti-submarine patrols, air coordinator, air observers, photographic plane, artillery spotters, smokers, fighter sweeps, heavy landing strike. In the event weather prevented execution of this mission by naval aircraft, naval gunfire was to be prepared to conduct fire on air objectives during this period. Call strikes, and strike aircraft. In this latter instance, the following missions were to be carried out. counter-battery fire against inland guns firing from Saipan and Tinian, and the destruction of those guns and installations that cannot be seen from our ships. The destruction of mobile artillery pieces with special emphasis on those on the slopes overlooking the landing areas of Saipan. The destruction of enemy personnel and vehicles moving either to or from the landing beaches and in the vicinity of the sugarcane fields and hills. And the dislocation of communications by bombardment of important road junctions.
Instructions for aircraft supporting attack on Saipan emphatically stressed that under no circumstances were pilots to fly through high-angle gunnery curtains, and that special precautions had to be taken to avoid flying through fire from mortars, rockets, and field artillery. Air observers were instructed to report immediately to commander support aircraft any change in front lines, or to report any change, if such were the case, hourly on the hour. Instructions for marking front lines were to be observed scrupulously. Failure of troops to mark front lines on request was to be reported to commander support aircraft.
The movement of assault and garrison elements to Saipan from the Hawaiian area and the South Pacific was echeloned. The first elements departed from the Hawaiian area on 26 May 1944. By 31 May, the majority of the reserve troops departed Pearl Harbor. During this period of movement by the assault forces, preparatory bombardment of the target areas had begun. On 3 June, aircraft of the Southwest Pacific Forces began the bombardment of Palau Islands. And from the 9th until the target date, these islands and those in the Western Carolines were harassed daily by aircraft. En route to Eniwetok, an unusual amount of emphasis was placed on indoctrination and the training program. The program was based upon the premise that knowledge of a complete picture of operations would aid all hands in the best execution of their orders intelligently and would permit them to act with greater initiative in emergencies. All possible means, including lectures, demonstrations, question and answer periods, relief models, charts, aerial and surface photos, motion pictures, drills, and so forth were to describe the immediate task ahead.
The movement to the staging area at Eniwetok was uneventful and without incident. Planes were held here, ready to be transferred to Saipan, when an airfield on that island was captured. By 11 June, Northern Attack Force reassembled at Eniwetok and departed for the target. The same day, Task Force 58 initiated its 3½ days intense carrier and surface bombardment on Saipan. Tinian. Guam. Rota. Again, enemy installations and facilities of all types were struck. Late photographic coverage of the landing beaches were secured.
During the night, harassing and illuminating fires were maintained on Saipan and Tinian by destroyers. On D-1, 14 June, Bombardment Group 1, consisting of the fire support ships of the Northern Attack Force, Task Force 52, joined the fast carrier task forces in a deliberate bombardment of the landing beaches and installations on Saipan. This bombardment covered mine-sweeping activities in the vicinity of the island and the work of underwater demolition teams, which reconnoitered and cleared the beaches of obstacles in preparation for the landing. Elements of Task Force 58 were detached on D-1 to undertake the first in a series of carrier strikes in support of the Saipan operation on the Bonin and Volcano Islands, north of the Marianes.
At 0452, 15 June, Commander Task Force 52 signaled, execute attack order all, 4-4. Transports arrived in the transport area of Saipan at 0524. Vice Admiral Turner signaled to the transport group commanders, take charge. Good luck.
Fire support ships started the preliminary bombardment at 0530 on schedule. The weather was favorable. Flying conditions good. Wind east, 13 knots. Moderate swell. Transports and LSTs arrived on schedule in assigned areas off the island and commenced launching boats and LVTs.
The 4 LSDs carrying medium tanks in LCMs launched promptly. After the transports arrived, key naval and marine personnel were embarked in LCCs.
Although this operation was carried out smartly, there was a delay in getting all control craft to their assigned stations. As the light improved, on the right could be seen the town of Charincanoa and the reef channel opposite its pier. To the north was Garapan, the capital city. In its harbor, Tenapag Harbor, could be seen beached, half-sunken and smoking ships, the results of the previous day's air and naval strikes. In the harbor was tiny fortified Managiasa Island. Aboard the ships, all was ready. Guns and winches were manned. Boats were being lowered and hatches cleared. Troops were alerted and waiting. A diversionary demonstration began off Tenapag Harbor. Boats were lowered, troops embarked, waves formed and proceeded to 5,000 yards off black beaches, where the force circled for 10 minutes. Off Charincanoa, shortly after 0700, the LSTs carrying assault LTs moved into position to launch their vehicles near the line of departure. The area near the line of departure showed increasing activity. Control vessels and guide boats were on station. Each carried its identifying flag. LCI scheduled to precede the first wave to the reef, nosed into position, and hundreds of landing vehicles circled in groups, forming their waves. At 8-90 minutes, naval gunfire ceased on the landing beaches. A heavy bombing strike was placed on the beaches and was followed by a strafing attack parallel to the beach. Planes retired, and the entire beach area was obscured by flame, smoke, and dust, as the warships again took over and concentrated their fire for the final and heaviest preparation on the immediate landing beaches. HR was delayed 10 minutes to 0840. The line of departure was 4,000 yards from the beach. It was about a 27-minute run by LVT to the beach.
Scheme of maneuver for the 2nd Division. Combat Team 8 at How Hour on Dog Day, land on beaches Green 1 and Green 2 with 2 landing teams abreast. Secure the point between beaches Green 2 and 3, and also the landing point on beach Green 3 for tanks. Direct the landing of companies A and B, reinforced, 2nd Tank Battalion. C, Sugar Mill area. Also the following hill target areas, and that portion of the 01 line within its zone of action.
Combat Team 6 at How Hour on Dog Day, land on beaches Red 2 and 3 with 2 landing teams abreast. Sees 01 line lying within assigned zone of action and cover left or north flank. Combat Team 2, after completion of its diversionary demonstration at Tanapag Harbor and upon arrival in the transport area, land on order on beaches Red 2 and 3 with 2 landing teams abreast. Landing Team 2 will come in on the right. Upon landing, Landing Team 2, 2nd Marines, will be attached to Combat Team 6. Landing Team 2, 6th Marines, will be attached to Combat Team 2. Division Reserve, be prepared to land on order. Division Artillery, land on division order. 2nd Armored Amphibious Battalion, cover the landing and movement of assault waves to the 01 line. Assist in protecting the division flanks. Scheme of maneuver, 4th Division. Combat Team 23 at How Hour on Dog Day, land on beaches Blue 1 and 2, and with its main effort initially on the left, seize the 01 line within its zone of action. Then on division order, and with its main effort on the right, advance rapidly to the 02 line. Seize Aslito Airfield and the remainder of 02 within its zone of action. Combat Team 25, at How Hour on Dog Day, land on beaches Yellow 1 and 2. Seize 01 line within its zone of action. Then on division order, advance rapidly and seize the 02 line within its zone of action. Assist Combat Team 23 in the capture of Aslito Airfield and protect the division right flank. Combat Team 24, land on division order on beaches Blue or Yellow and prepare to support the attack. Shortly after 0800, control vessels hoisted their Wave 1 flag. The LCKs headed toward the beach, and the first wave started for the line of departure. The 2nd Division found only weak resistance when it hit the beaches. And by 0900 had advanced about 500 yards. Then, enemy resistance, supported by artillery and mortar fire, became exceedingly stiff.
On the other hand, the 4th Division encountered heavy resistance immediately upon landing. Despite the heavy bombardment, landing mines were still a threat. The dangerous areas were marked off and the mines removed.
By 0920, the diversionary force off Tanapag returned to its ships and re-embarked. No fires had been received from shore, and no enemy movements were observed. By late afternoon, the 2nd Division had established a line which looked like this. At the same time, the 4th Division had created a line as follows. Toward evening, conditions improved somewhat. Elements on the right of the 2nd Division had captured a radio station. By 15:08 on D-Day, the 4th Tank Battalion of the 4th Division and the 2nd Tank Battalion of the 2nd Division were beginning to land. Almost at the same time, 3 battalions of the 14th Marines and the 2nd Battalion of the 10th Marines had commenced landing. The 24th Corps Artillery remained afloat. Day's end saw the troops firmly established ashore and about 50% of the 01 line secured. To the southeast, about 2,000 yards, lay Aslito Airport, most important single factor in the winning of Saipan. To provide more suitable ground for defense against the expected enemy counterattack during the night of D-Day, elements of both the 2nd Marine Division and 4th Marine Division were withdrawn to this line. The Japs, attacking savagely twice during the night and once at dawn of D+1 day, made every effort to drive us back into the sea. Regimental Combat Team 25 repulsed an enemy counterattack which began at 0430 on D+1. From the direction of Garapan, a Jap force attacked the left flank of the city. This NIP attempt was smashed with the aid of naval and air support. Another counterattack was launched against the left flank of Combat Team 23. It, too, was unsuccessful. While the counterattacks were being blunted and stopped, Regimental Combat Team 8 was successfully securing Green Beach 3. It also captured the pier at Charan Kanoa, permitting use of the channel for landing of all types of small craft.
Smashing forward in a coordinated attack, the 4th Division executed a pivot movement, which gained it 1,000 yards. Our tanks spearheaded the attack.
By dark, one regiment of the 27th Infantry Division was being landed in the area of the 4th Marine Division. The plan for the next day called initially for the advance of lines, so that space would be created in which to land the remainder of the 27th and Corps troops. With nightfall, the enemy remained true to form. He counterattacked. The major counterattack of this night was thrown against the 2nd Division at 0330. 1 hour later, the Jap attack had been smashed. Our bazookas, half-track, and medium tank fire knocked out 31 enemy tanks in this action. At 0730 D+2, the 4th Division jumped off in a coordinated attack supported by fire initially from the 2nd Division. This venture also received air and naval support, as well as continuous artillery support. Movement was slow because of stiff enemy resistance. At 0920, the 2nd Division launched an attack in its zone of action, extended its beachhead and center lines, and by noon was situated 400 yards east of Lake Susupi. After 1200, the 2nd Division, assisted by tanks, advanced more rapidly. Throughout the day, while the 2nd and 4th Divisions hacked out a larger beachhead and extended their front lines, the balance of the 27th Division was in process of landing. 24th Corps Artillery continued in the process of landing until dark, but succeeded in beaching only 2/3 of one battalion. At 1000 on D+3, the 2nd and 4th Divisions, as well as the 27th, which had moved up, launched a coordinated attack toward Aslito Airport. With the exception of a pocket of defense between the two Marine divisions, the 2nd and 4th secured the O3 line. At the same time, the 27th slipped in to capture the Aslito Airport. Naval construction engineers commenced work on the strip at once. The first 4 days of fighting had gained for us the complete southwestern portion of Saipan, vital Aslito Airport, and more than 2,000 enemy casualties. Our forward line was as follows.
Almost simultaneously with United States landings on Saipan, the enemy determined to contest the issue with all the naval and air power at his disposal. Accordingly, the movement of his major fleet units from southern Philippine waters was reported by American submarines on 15 June. On 19-20 June, units of the Japanese fleet were in contact with the United States Fifth Fleet in a 2-day running air battle west of the Marianes, which marked the first major encounter of the Japanese and American fleets since the fighting in waters off Guadalcanal. In this engagement, the enemy lost 5 ships sunk, 2 probably sunk, and 11 damaged, in addition to 428 carrier-based aircraft destroyed, before breaking off contact on the evening of 20 June. Effect of the naval air action, concluded with the engagement of 19-20 June, was to reduce to the minimum the enemy's capabilities of intervening effectively in the Saipan operation by sea and air.
2nd and 4th Divisions, as well as the 27th Infantry Division, launched attacks with the coming of daylight on D+4. This combined attack drove the enemy to 300 yards beyond the O3 line. At 1700, one battery of 155mm guns was preparing to register and commenced firing on Tinian. At the same time, a serious supply situation was alleviated when several transports of the Northern Task Force returned. All lines were improved, particularly the boundary between the 2nd and 4th Divisions, where an enemy pocket was wiped out. During the night of D+4, enemy activity was reported in the vicinity of Purple Beaches. A DD illuminated and engaged this area by fire. At 0900 the next day, all divisions were ordered to attack for the purpose of driving to the eastern coast of Saipan and destroying the enemy troops within the southern portion of the island.
Rocket-loaded planes joined the attack. Enemy positions were softened up by intensive strafing and rocket shelling.
The 2nd and 4th Divisions were assigned to secure the O4 line. The 27th attacked southward toward Naputan Point. By 1616, D+5, the 04 line was secured by the 2nd and 4th Divisions, and instructions were issued to occupy the most suitable ground for launching a continuance of the attack when ordered. The 27th Division continued to advance slowly against the enemy, who had taken up positions in caves and pillboxes situated in extremely rugged terrain. At the conclusion of this period, the beachhead had been extended to a line which secured the entire southern portion of the island, except for Naputan Point. The enemy forces remaining in the Naputan area were thus trapped and cut off by the 27th. The way was then clear for a coordinated northward movement. The next 3 days settled down to a vicious, yard-by-yard fighting to clean out enemy pockets of resistance, especially on Naputan Point, and straightening out of the lines.
Around 21:45 on 20 June, D+5, in the vicinity of Beach Green 2, one of our gasoline dumps exploded. Reasons unknown. Fire spread to ammunition dumps, which resulted in the loss of an undetermined amount of small arms and ammunition.
3,000 yards of Naputan still remained in enemy hands. Progress was slow due to the terrain, which was infested with occupied caves. This called for mopping up action by flamethrowers, shape charges, and grenades. A good number of enemy weapons had been captured, many of which we were beginning to use against the enemy. In particular was this true with anti-aircraft artillery weapons. 15 tons of mortar ammunition captured on 21 June was fired back at the enemy through our 81mm mortars.
From 0115 till about 0500 on D+7, Saipan was subjected to an air raid by Japanese planes. 13 500-pound bombs were dropped in the area of the 1st Battalion, 14th Marines. Casualties were 1 killed and 4 wounded.
At 0600, preceded by an intense artillery preparation of 10 minutes fire by 18 battalions of field artillery, the 2nd and 4th Marine Divisions jumped off and quickly captured the 05 line. After the first hour, enemy resistance and terrain slowed down the advance. At 1000 that morning, a destroyer supporting the 2nd Battalion, 105th Infantry, fired into the command post, killing 8 and wounding 32. 155mm gun battalions were used to disrupt operational use of the airstrips on Tinian, as well as northern Saipan. During this period, our tanks played an important part in supporting our troops. The vital hill, Mount Tipopali, was captured by the 2nd and 4th Divisions, while important approaches to the commanding ground of the island, Mount Tapacho, was also in our control. From these positions, it was tentatively planned to ease the 27th Division through the left flank of the 4th Division and continue the attack to the north. About 60% of the 2nd Division tanks were still in operating condition. The 4th Division was able to employ about 50% of its tanks. The 27th tanks were in good condition. The 1st Squadron of Army P-47s to be used for combat air patrols arrived at Aslito Airfield.
On D+8, Commander Northern Troops and Landing Force ordered a coordinated attack with 3 divisions abreast to jump off at 1000. The 2nd on the left, the 4th on the right, and the 27th in the middle.
The 2nd and 4th Divisions jumped off on time and advanced about 250 yards in the first hour. The 27th failed to jump off on time. Units of the 27th mistook supporting units of the 4th Division, which was stationary, for the front lines. A delay was caused. As a result, the 2nd and 4th Divisions were forced to anchor their flanks to the center and proceed slowly in order to prevent serious gaps from arising. Thus, the attack was not coordinated, confusion resulted, and little advance was made during the day. Preparations were made for an attack the next day, in which the same objectives were reassigned. At the same time, Landing Team 2 of the 105th jumped off at 1300 with 3 companies abreast to take the remainder of Natvitan Point and clean up what was left of enemy resistance on the southeastern portion of Saipan.
23-24 June, D+89. Harassing enemy artillery fire made it necessary for American spotting planes to be put into the air from 2100 to 2300 and from 0300 to dawn. Enemy positions were thus picked out via fire flashes. An artillery duel ensued.
The remaining garrison of P-47s and night fighter planes capable of carrying 500-pound bombs arrived at Aslito Airfield. From about 04:45 to 05:15, enemy artillery shelled the area of the 10th Marines. The Fire Direction Center was hit, killing the executive officer, wounding the R2 and R3, and disrupting artillery communications. Several enemy tank attacks were beaten back. Bazookas, anti-tank grenades, 37s, and half-tracks were employed in the destruction of about 30 enemy tanks. Thermite grenades and demolition charges were dropped into disabled tanks. During the day, the 4th Division on the right advanced 2,000 yards and occupied its immediate objective against light opposition. The 27th in the center gained less ground, thereby causing a gap to arise on the left flank of the 4th Division.
Beginning late afternoon on 24 June and continuing for more than a week, enemy air attacks were directed against Aslito Airfield.
While the 4th Marine Division continued its swift advance along the eastern coast of Saipan, and the 27th made small advances along the center, the 2nd Marine Division entered the fringes of Garapan town, where it found many mines and enemy sniper fire. The 8th Marines advanced over rough terrain and captured Mount Tapacho, commanding ground of Saipan. Rockets were used effectively by the 4th Division to thicken the artillery fires. This resulted in the 4th Division cleaning up the Bluff Point area. Capture of that point narrowed the front considerably and pinched out the 4th Division. As Leto Airfield, despite being rocked by enemy attacks from the air, was consistently used by our fighter craft. During the morning of D+11, 33 of our fighters, loaded with 500 and 1,000-pound bombs, took off from Leto to strike at Tinian. The end of the day saw improved positions along the line, and about half the area of Saipan in our hands. Our forces then held the best positions since the initial landing. With a firm anchor in the southern half of the island, the grueling task ahead was to continue northward where the enemy still was entrenched.
26 June 1944, D+1011. At 21:05, condition red was flashed at Leto Airfield. Enemy bombs dropped on the northeast corner of the field.
No planes were damaged, but personnel casualties were received, and a small fire started in one building. Several other raids occurred during the night.
At the same time, enemy ground troops armed with 50 caliber machine guns and 20mm pieces raided Leto Airfield. All available engineers and CBs on the spot defended the field. About 07:35, the situation was reported well in hand. Sweeping up from the as yet unconquered Naputan Point, the enemy attacked Hill 500. Inasmuch as the 25th Marines of the Northern Troops and Landing Force Reserve had made a wise selection in the occupation of an assembly area on Hill 500, the enemy was repulsed with 400 killed. During this period, the railroad between the piers at Beach Blue 1 and Leto Airfield was placed in operation.
At 06:30 on D+13, the 2nd Division of the 27th Infantry jumped off to the attack.
The 4th Division held its position, awaiting the advance of the 27th on its left. It supported the advance of the 27th by fire. To the already difficult conditions that prevailed was added a persistent rain that lasted for several days. While the 105th Infantry at last took possession of Naputan Point, the 27th advanced about 600 yards to the north. However, no contact was made with either the 4th or the 2nd Divisions. Bitter ground fighting was accompanied by heavy air support. Airstrikes were made on Mount Mapi, the airfield on northern Saipan, both airfields on Tinian, and the strip on Rota were struck in quick succession.
The 27th Division was outdistanced on either flank. However, by nightfall of D+13, the 27th had advanced approximately 1,000 yards and made contact with the right flank of the 2nd Marine Division. A gap of 500 yards still existed between the 27th and 4th Divisions.
Engineers continued road construction and maintenance, railroad repair and airfield construction. The 805th Aviation Engineer Battalion surveyed Cagman Point for airfield location and construction to commence at once. At the same time, mine disposal teams were active in clearing purple and brown beaches of mines and obstacles on beaches and in the water.
On D+17, following a heavy artillery preparation at 0830, the attack began with the 3 divisions abreast. The 4th Division on the right flank pushed on rapidly, and by mid-afternoon had gobbled up approximately 1,600 yards. A halt was then called in order to organize the ground and to protect the gap on the left flank.
By evening, the 27th Infantry Division had advanced over rough terrain for about 1,800 yards, thereby making contact on the right with the 4th Division. On the left, the 2nd Division moved further into Garapan town. Simultaneously, it probed out to take the high ground overlooking Garapan. By noon, the Marines of the 2nd Division occupied about 800 yards of Garapan. By dusk, Hill 209 Howe was taken. The rough terrain on the right of the 2nd Division and in the zone of action of the 27th required considerable mopping up in the rear areas. This job was turned over to the reserve battalions. Large quantities of Japanese equipment, ordnance, and ammunition were located in bypassed caves within the zone of action occupied by the 27th. The previous 9 days of action had straightened out the front lines and placed the 3 divisions in contact with one another. The troops of all divisions were now in a position for a coordinated attack abreast, with objectives the capture of Garapan, Flores Point, and Tanapag, as well as the control of the beaches and Tanapag Harbor.
The first news that the Japanese were using barbed wire came on the night of 2-3 July, D+1718, when a 4th Marine Division patrol encountered an enemy pocket on the right flank. The 23rd Marines wiped out the pocket, killing 25 Japanese.
The 2nd Marine Division began a slow, steady advance. Principal resistance came from machine gun fire. In Garapan, the enemy fought from wrecked houses, from behind bushes, hedges, and man-made fortifications. They were everywhere.
Garapan had to be taken street by street. However, the commanding general of the 2nd Division stated that Garapan would be taken prior to darkness, D+18.
The 6th Marines reported that the Japanese were throwing down blocks of picric acid from cliffs in front of the 3rd Battalion. In the center, the 27th Division was held up initially by 5 pillboxes. By 14:30, opposition had been overcome, and an hour and a half later, the front line of the 27th had advanced about 1,000 yards. Late in the afternoon, enemy artillery fire was received from Tinian in the 14th Marines area. The enemy targets immediately were taken under fire by Corps artillery. Communications were improving. The Saipan Railroad continued to run 3 trains daily to Aslito Airfield with approximately 50 tons of supplies per train. In addition, runs were made to the 4th Division railhead on the east of the island. Day's end saw approximately 75% of the island secured. High commanding terrain all along the center of the lines was in our hands. Garapan was ours. To be defended that night was a front line ranging 11,000 yards. With the nutcracker squeeze now on, and the Japanese forces being compressed into a pocket toward the north part of the island, there began a series of night banzai attacks. The first of these took place on the night of 3 July, when approximately 100 Japanese attacked the 165th Infantry command post. The fanatical, suicidal attack was repulsed. At 07:30 the following day, preceded by an artillery preparation, the 2nd Marine Division and the 27th Infantry Division jumped off to the attack. By 0900, the 2nd Division on the left had secured Mucho Point. An hour later, the 6th Marines had struck through to the beach at Tanapag Harbor. At the same time, the 8th Marines were swinging around, and they also reached Tanapag Harbor. By early afternoon, the 2nd Division commenced mopping up operations in Garapan and Tanapag Harbor, where anti-boat mines were reported on the beach. The 27th crunched ahead and reached the beach on the 07 line. Joining the stepped-up advance of the ground troops, the Air Force lashed out in a devastating attack. 8 bombing and strafing airstrikes were made on Saipan. These attacks were pointed mainly at Japanese columns moving northward. Simultaneously, 3 airstrikes were made on Tinian. The 4th Division, swinging on a pivot to the left, struck at Hill 721. This objective was taken, and the commanding ground overlooking Tanapag Harbor was secured, which prevented the enemy from escaping to the northeast. Not yet ready to quit for the day, the 23rd and 25th Marines plunged on, and by evening had advanced 1,200 yards further and had secured Hill 767. By nightfall, the 2nd Division had secured Mucho Point. The 27th had extended its beachhead in its zone of action, and the 4th Division had secured the 07 line. Despite the continued rain, which lasted during the remainder of the operation, the Air Force was active from dawn to dusk.
During the night, 4-5 July, D plus 1920, Corps artillery concentrated on Marpy Point Airfield and 2 airfields on Tinian. Harassing fire was placed in front of the 4th Division.
With daylight, Corps artillery directed its fire to soften the opposition of the 4th Division and the 27th. The 225th Field Artillery Battalion registered on Managiasi Bay. Resistance throughout the day was confined to sporadic fire from small dugouts in the 4th Division zone of action, to blockhouses and pillboxes along the west coast in the 27th zone of action. This 3-day period resulted in the narrowing of the front line and a concerted drive northeastward, which placed in American hands 85% of the land mass of Saipan Island. final stage of the battle for Saipan took place in the period from this point on. With their backs to the sea and their front lines doggedly being chewed to pieces, the Japanese began to offer stiffer resistance, coupled with nighttime banzai attacks. Throughout the night on 5 July, the 27th Division reported sniper fire. Local counterattacks accompanied by hysterical screaming on the part of the Japs were reported in the 105th Infantry Zone of action. The enemy was annihilated. At 0900, 6 July, a new boundary between divisions was assigned. This new boundary caused the 27th Infantry Division to be pinched off. It was then given the mission of completing the mopping up of the area in its zone. At the same time, Regimental Combat Team 2 was released from Northern Troops and Landing Force Reserve to the control of the 4th Division. The mission of the 4th Division was the continuance of the attack northeast and the completion of Saipan's capture. By 1400, the 2 regiments on the right had advanced about 1,200 yards against light enemy opposition. At 1500, the 2nd Tank Battalion, Company A, was attached to the 4th.
At 2024, 6 July, D+21, a banzai counterattack against the 25th Marines was repulsed with no casualties. The enemy persistently attempted to infiltrate the lines of the 4th Division. At 0515, the 27th reported a large-scale banzai attack on the left flank. At 0635, despite tank support, the Japs had overrun the 1st and 2nd Battalions of the 105th Infantry. The crazed and fanatical enemy continued with its newfound advance and clashed with 2 batteries belonging to the 10th Marines. Holding their ground, the Marines fired all their ammunition, using air bursts cut to 4/10 of a second. When the last artillery shell had been fired and the last machine gun bullet sent on its way, the firing locks of the guns were removed and the artillerymen took to the lines and became infantrymen. At 0755, D+22, the 106th Infantry was committed to retake the field artillery positions that had been lost and to restore the lines of the 105th Infantry. Good progress was made throughout the morning. By 1300, the 2 lost battery positions had been recaptured. By 1400, the 27th Division had reestablished itself as follows.
The 4th Marine Division jumped off to the attack at 0930. On the right, the 25th Marines with the 1st and 2nd Battalions abreast and the 3rd Battalion in reserve. The 24th Marines attacked with the 1st and 2nd Battalions abreast and the 3rd Battalion in reserve. Progress was rapid. Resistance was ineffectual. During the day, the 25th Marines advanced from 600 to 1,000 yards. The 24th Marines moved ahead about 1,200 yards. The 2nd Marines about 400 yards, and the 23rd Marines 100 yards. At dusk, it was evident that the main effort of the enemy's counterattack had been broken. The 27th Division lines were reestablished.
7-8 July, 1944, D+22-23. Wounded of the 105th Infantry were evacuated by LVTs during the night. In the zone of action of the 106th Infantry, firing continued throughout the night. Small units of Japanese would begin their attacks by shouting and screaming epithets and blowing whistles. In every instance, these attacks were repulsed before they could be well formed. Once again, the 27th Infantry Division reported a large Japanese counterattack. The Japs were annihilated by rifle and machine gun fire. Again and again during the night, the Japs persisted in suicidal attempts to crack our lines.
By morning, the areas in front of our lines were covered with enemy dead. Despite enemy activity, the 4th Division jumped off to the attack at 0630 to seize the area between the high ground in the center of the division zone of action and the beach area on the west coast. Progress was slow due to difficult terrain. A good deal of the resistance came from caves where the enemy fought until the end.
Meanwhile, the 2nd Marine Division moved forward from their night positions. By noon, they had passed through and relieved the 2 regiments on the left, belonging to the 27th Division.
The 2nd Division was diverted from its attack in order to mop up several enemy pockets which had infiltrated. Further resistance was met in a complicated network of communication trenches and caves in the cliffs from which the Japanese resisted with machine guns, hand grenades, and rifle fire. When enemy ammunition ran out, the Japs resisted with bayonets and swords attached to long sticks. Those who had no weapons used the sticks.
(8-9 July 1944, D plus 2324. During the night, Oswego Airfield was attacked several times. One of the enemy aircraft fell victim to a P-47 in a night duel. Another of the enemy ships crashed into the sea as the result of hits by automatic weapons. A total of approximately 25 bombs were dropped during the night. No casualties were reported.
With only 3 square miles of ground remaining in enemy hands, the 4th Division and the 2nd Division started its final drive.
By this time, Japanese women and children were beginning to emerge from the caves in which they had taken refuge. Though some of the enemy military personnel were surrendering, the majority of the Japanese were fighting to the finish. Appeals to surrender were made to the enemy by natives through loudspeakers. Japanese propaganda, which convinced the natives that death was more desirable than surrender to the Americans, caused wholesale suicide off Saipan's sheer rocky cliffs.
There began then an inch-by-inch mop-up in which the enemy had to be cleaned out of caves, pillboxes, and holes. Dense undergrowth and rugged terrain forced the pace to become a slow one. Time and again, flame-throwing tanks scorched the enemy out of their hiding places. Demolition squads and small arms fire sometimes were the only means by which the enemy could be reached. By 1615, 9 July, D plus 25, conquest of Saipan Island was completed. still remaining were mopping up operations against small isolated groups. At 10:00 of 10 July, the American flag was raised. The battle for Saipan was over.
The actual capture and destruction of enemy forces on Saipan was by no means concluded with the announcement that the island was secured on 9 July. For at least 3 weeks following that date, Japanese military personnel, numbering between 50 and 150 each day, were captured or destroyed in the mopping up operations conducted by the Saipan garrison forces. Base development at the objective had been carried out unceasingly throughout the assault operations under the direction of the island commander. Effective mopping up operations took a heavy toll of enemy personnel, 7,783 being killed during the period of 9 July to 10 August. During the same period, 1,120 enemy were taken prisoner. On 20 July, the Kagman Peninsula airfield was completed and operational. Saipan played a vital role in the Tinian assault. The shore-to-shore movement for that phase was based on the southern beaches of Saipan and in Tanapag Harbor. The artillery, land-based air, and logistical support for both the Tinian and Guam operations were provided from Saipan. The 27th Infantry Division, originally in Corps Reserve on Saipan for the Tinian phase, was released to the temporary control of the island commander of Saipan on 29 July to expedite mopping up operations. On 10 August, Commander 5th Fleet announced that the capture and occupation phase of Saipan was completed, and accordingly full command and responsibility for the development and defense of that base passed to its commander. And the island fell within the overall command of Commander Forward Area Central Pacific.